Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of The Role of Law. The talk of the town these days, of course, is the United States election, and even in the previous episode we discussed about international law and its effects here in Sri Lanka. But judging by the politics of the world, women in politics has become a pertinent topic to speak of. And recently, Kamala Harris, US Vice President-elect, will be taking office, of course, in January after the United States election process is complete. And with that, it gave rise to a discussion about female representation in leadership roles here in Sri Lanka and across the globe. And to discuss these matters and more, we have with us today Attorney at Law Chamathka Ratnayake, a director at the Yeheliya Foundation. A very good evening, Chamathka, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Chamathka, now with the election of Kamala Harris as the Vice President of the United States, social media went crazy. And especially in Sri Lanka, there were many posts that I saw where people said, United States is electing their first female Vice President now. We had a female Prime Minister. Decades ago, they were referring to Prime Minister Sri Lanka, and as such, conclusion, Sri Lanka is a better place for women. Sri Lanka has a better place for women in politics. Is this true?
See, the thing is, I think we need to acknowledge that both of those achievements by both of those women is exemplary. I don't think one is better than the other. But I think when Mrs. Sirimawa Bandaranaike became Prime Minister in 1964, her background and the background in which Ms. Kamala Harris became Vice President is completely different. I think we need to acknowledge that. But also, I think more than having elected someone more than 50 years ago, we need to think about how far we've come since then. What have we done to increase female representation since then? What have we done to carry the torch forward? So I don't think it should be a conversation about, okay, we did that then, but like, where are we now? Right? We have only 5.3% female representation in Parliament today, which is only 12 out of 225 members, right? And that gets worse as we move down to provincial level, right? So we really need to think about what we have done since then to empower women and not just talk about this one heroic moment, right? And I think that's important more than anything, but I think it's okay to acknowledge both of those women as winners. I think in the world today, there's so much going on, and I think everyone needs to feel good about themselves. And these sort of achievements matter to women and girls around the world. And it's okay to acknowledge them. But we also need to think about how we are going to move forward.
So starting things off, of course, on the role of law, we try to discuss legal matters and how the law can really aid and help us to solve these issues. Recently, in 2015, there was an amendment brought that introduced a mandatory 25% quota for women at the local government level. Has this worked?
See, I think I first have to acknowledge that imposing that mandatory quota was the culmination of a lot of work done by civil society activists and political parties that have come together, right? But I don't think a quota alone could address the very deep-seated structural issues in our political system that go against women running for office, right? I think a quota is a start, but I think there are so many other issues that we need to acknowledge. Are these women qualified or knowledgeable enough to take those positions? Is there enough capacity building or technical expertise given to them, right? Are there enough women wanting to run for office? Because one of the biggest issues with the 25% quota was that the political parties couldn't find enough women to fill those positions.
To fill the nomination list.
To fill the nomination list. And also it antagonized maybe more qualified men, right? So we need to deal with structural issues that affect that alongside the quota if we are to move forward.
So, do you mean that to say that the quota has not achieved any purpose, or the quota alone isn't enough?
I think it will take a little time to see the effects of the quota. Just like when we gave girls the right to education, we didn't see 100% of girls going to school on the first day, right? It was incremental. So we will see these changes incrementally. I think we talk about New Zealand a lot when we talk about female representation now.
And diversity.
Right? And the diversity of representation they have in their cabinet, and the diversity of women, even the diverse groups of women who are represented in their parliament. And I think that's not something they achieved overnight. I think for the past 50 to 100 years, they have incrementally changed certain things, imposed quotas, given certain minorities rights to vote for certain sectors, and that is how they have come here. So I don't think in 89 years since women have received universal franchise in this country, it has been, right? We received universal franchise in the year 1931. And since then, this was the first concrete step we took in 2015. Right?
Introducing the quota.
Introducing the quota, right? And I don't think we can expect change to come overnight.
So one thing that happened with the introduction of this quota, another broadly discussed topic, of course, here in the Sri Lankan political sphere is nepotism, and how family connections really, helps you get that extra mile. So when this 25% quota was introduced, we saw a lot of local government bodies being filled by either wives or daughters or relatives, female relatives of politicians who are already in power. Is this really moving backwards? Is this favorable?
See, the thing is, when a quota is imposed on political parties, especially the quota was imposed in 2015-16, and there was a local government election in 2018. Right? I don't think there was enough time for political parties to plan ahead and make lists of women who are already qualified or have had the pertinent training to run for office. So that was just the first time, right? And I think this whole problem of nepotism is ingrained within our political system, be it in local government, provincial, or at national level. That's something we need to deal with outside of the political system, as well as the gatekeepers of these political parties need to think about diversity of representation. And I think that's where we have gone wrong, in that what we as civil society organizations advocate for and what political parties advocate for and put forward as nominees to run for office are starkly different, right? They put forward people who can win a popularity contest without much regard for diversity, representation, equality, without understanding the impact it could make within governance and within policy making. And I think so long as political parties don't understand the role they have to play within it, I don't see anything changing in the foreseeable future either.
So you speak about representation. Just for the benefit of our viewers, why is this so important?
First of all, I think it's a known fact that 52% of this country comprises of women. Moreover, 56% of the voting population are women. Not to mention that the highest foreign income earners in this country are migrant women. Also, the textile industry, the tea industry, the rubber industry, the state sector, all large employers of women and large income earners of this country are all women. So in the spirit of a representative democracy, if these voices aren't represented in our national legislature, and there are only 12 of them to represent all of these women, there is a problem, right?
Definitely. So at the end of the day, isn't it this 51% of population of women and the 56% of constituents in Sri Lanka who can vote, the people who send male representatives to represent them, is that undemocratic?
Okay, so let me give you a little statistic from the general elections of 2020, right? Out of 7,452 nominees from all political parties, less than 600 were women, right? And most of those nominations were also from independent groups who don't stand much of a chance of getting elected to parliament. And out of that 600, only 60 of them were from major political parties. So we have to first think if we are giving people much of a choice in the women they choose, right? Yes, there is a problem with women not voting for women, but that is something that could be addressed after maybe we give a little bit more nominations to women and give them a diverse choice to choose from. We are giving them, okay, in a list in the outstations of Colombo, you'll have 10 men as opposed to 2 women, right? So like, are we giving people much of a choice? And although people say that this system of elections, the proportional representation system, is supposed to encourage equality and be better for equality in representation. But in a country like ours, where you have to spend millions on elections, is that really feasible for someone to run? Someone from outside of this whole political hierarchy to run? Does someone have access to that sort of money or that sort of connections or that sort of networks to even get that money? So there are so many issues that we need to deal with.
Also, speaking on female representation in parliament, you said of lack of a choice, but then on the part of females, there is a bit of females are a bit hesitant to enter the political sphere, to run for office. Is this a problem?
See, I think when we look at females not running for political office, there are 3 stages of it. Why women are reluctant to even think about getting into politics. That's one. Second is this whole issue of nominations that I spoke about, that political parties don't give enough women nominations. And then there is a struggle of actually, after getting nomination, the struggle of getting elected, the way our election system is made. So one of the women who actually spoke to us during our Diyavanna Tharane program, Yeheliya's Diyavanna Tharane program, one that we did with the aim of making people aware of the lack of female representation in Sri Lanka. What this certain lady who spoke to us, a parliamentarian, what she said was she had to sell her vehicle in order to run for elections.
Right.
And that's the sort of money you need to spend, right? And that's a huge issue. And there was another lady who told us, when you look around you in parliament as a woman, you are surrounded by men, and you have to always look a little further to see another female member and how intimidating it could be.
So you're pointing towards the political culture in Sri Lanka not being conducive to allow female representation.
Yeah, and I think the political culture is seen as somewhat masculine. From the way you campaign, from the way people speak on stages, and also from like the various personal attacks that are held towards politicians these days, and the role the media plays in supporting or dissuading women from running to office, running for office, right? There are various personal attacks about the way she looks or the way she talks or how she dresses or her personal life, none that is relevant to her political career. So women run despite all this. And I think the main reason, another reason women don't vote for women is because they see politicians as these masculine macho men who should impose themselves, who should be strong, and like see women as somewhat, it's something culturally seen, women are seen as somewhat weak and not dominant enough. But what we have seen around the world is that if women are elected to office, they are more likely to focus on things like education, healthcare, things that affect issues that affect women and children, and the family unit in general. And I think given COVID now and how much funding should go into our healthcare system, I think it's important to point out that women have championed these sort of initiatives and policies around the world, and that is why we need more women.
So currently, since you spoke about COVID-19, there were a lot of concerns raised when the Women's and Children's Bureau wasn't given enough recognition, at least in the cabinet. Do you think that maybe in a future cabinet reshuffle, this could be addressed by the existing female representation in Parliament, by allowing one of them to take over this?
See, when we talk about female representation in cabinet in general, we have one female member in cabinet and 2 state female ministers, right? And there are 5 more female parliamentarians, if I'm not mistaken, in government, right? But they still managed to appoint a male as the Minister of Women and Children's Affairs, right? And on top of that, it was demoted to a state ministry status, right? And so that, if I'm not mistaken, the state ministry comes under the purview of the Ministry of Education and also has the added burden of looking into the primary education and kindergarten education. And when you look at the tasks that have been put under that ministry, I think women have been mentioned not more than 2 or 3 times. And I think moreover, I think it talks about females and their role within the family and as a mother, a sister, a wife, and in the family unit, which is as important. But beyond that, I don't think any of the other issues are addressed within that. And I think that's a huge problem. I think the demotion could be seen as disregard for women and children's issues, isn't it?
You believe that it's a disregard to women and children's issues?
Because the thing is...
Are you of the opinion that having a male parliamentarian or a male minister in charge of these matters really doesn't cut it? Does it have to be a woman?
Oh, I am not of the opinion that men can't champion female issues. But the problem is, this is someone unknown and someone whose previous records on the issues pertaining to women and children that we don't know of. And I still haven't heard to this date what's happening within that ministry or something that's been implemented within that ministry that's come on the media. So we need to really think about, although we shouldn't just look at women to represent women. Of course men can represent women. But like, they need to be representative of those issues and problems. And it's the same with parliamentarians in general. They need to represent the issues of the communities they represent. Like, if we look at women in parliament, most of whom have been elected since 1931, there have been 154 seats allocated to women since the inception, right? If you look at it, all of them have been from a Sinhala Buddhist background or otherwise, or a Sinhala Christian background. There have been less than 20 women representing minority backgrounds from a Muslim background or a Tamil background. So there needs to be diversity of representation even within female representation, because women aren't a homogeneous group. Urban women have different needs to women in the tea industry. They would have different needs to women in the East. They would have different needs to women in the North, who will have issues of displacement, access to land. So I think if there isn't diversity of representation even among female representation, that's a problem in itself.
So to begin with, we don't even have adequate female representation, but we're trying to get diversity among female representation
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
for sure. I think that's important because we are talking about representative democracy, right? It's not just like token women that we want to put forward. It's women who will represent the voices of everyone.
So we spoke of a broad range of issues, and it seems like an unfathomable level of issues that we're facing when we speak about female representation in Sri Lanka. As the Yeheliya Foundation, who promotes female representation in Sri Lanka, how do you plan on addressing these? What have you done?
I think as an organization, we have tried to create awareness on the issue first. And I think a lot of the awareness programs that are done on the issue are done in English, given this show, for example. Right? And a majority of the citizens in this country are Sinhalese speaking or Tamil speaking, right? If they don't have access to information that there is an actual problem, I don't think that's awareness is the first step of solving that problem. And I think we were able to make a short video that was very impactful during the election, which wasn't done in any language and could be accessible to anyone who speaks any language. And I think that's important. And I think we also need to amplify the voices of the women currently in office. People talk about how they haven't done anything and that they're useless and that the 12 women are completely useless and do nothing.
And that's part of the reason why people don't vote for women.
Yes.
That's what they say.
Yes, but I think being a minority of voices within parliament is difficult in itself, right? And I think the Parliamentary Caucus for Women have come forward and said that themselves, that it is difficult to be a minority. Even if you table a bill in parliament that doesn't have majority support, it's problematic because it won't pass and it looks like they haven't done any work. Even in the past, the sectoral committee headed by Dr. Tusita Wijayawanna for gender and women, they did a lot of work. In fact, the removal of the 6th line of the birth certificate with regard to the parents' marital status, that was first put forward in parliament through that committee. And also there were proposed amendments to the Candian Marriage and Inheritance Ordinance, which disproportionately affects women and is discriminatory towards women. So there is work done. It's just that these things are not amplified within parliament and also are not amplified by the media also. I think the media itself, has a large part to play in increasing female representation and giving them a platform and a voice to talk about female issues and not just like put clickbait videos on the internet or on electronic media or like what people would cling on to because it's current, right? I think we need to switch to policy-based politics.
When you say, clickbait videos, what do you mean exactly?
I think the media feeds people what they like to hear or what they want to watch. And I think most of it is of no relevance to the policies or anything of substance that women bring forward. I think their personal lives are sensationalized. I don't think I want to bring in examples. I think a certain female member of parliament and her personal life and who she decides to spend her time with was up for public conversation in the last 5 or so years, right? And I think that sort of thing should be done away with. We should do politics based on policy and not based on popularity. And I think politics should be principled, right? And if we create a space for women to speak about their issues, only will representation increase. Only will people know what they are voting for. And I don't think people understand what policies they are voting for when they put people forward. And I think that's a huge part of the issue.
So we were speaking about gender discrimination in politics. Is it as bad in other sectors here in Sri Lanka?
See, the thing is, in terms of global indicators with regard to health or education, Sri Lanka is somewhat ahead of our South Asian neighbors even, right? In terms of the health sector, the education sector, or women in corporates, right? We saw the first female CEO being appointed recently, right? I think women have gained a lot of space in other industries or in other professions, right? But we sort of lag behind in political representation, and that is also something of concern, because when we look at other South Asian countries, right, be it India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, with more conservative societies with regard to women, they also have more representation than us. We are only ahead of the Maldives when we look at female representation in South Asia.
In parliament?
Yes, in national legislatures. Right? Even Afghanistan, which is a newer democracy than us, has more female representation in their national legislature. And the thing is, 4 of those countries actually managed to impose this quota that we managed to bring forward in 2015 much earlier than us. So
and now it's working for them.
Exactly. So it's coming into fruition only now. So
Right.
even in India, although Lok Sabha, they have a bicameral system, right? So even within the highest level of government, there is still a lack of representation. There is a lot of grassroots level organization and support for women. And I think even in Sri Lanka, it needs to be top down and bottom up as well if we are to address this issue.
So we're in the final few minutes of our show. Chamathka, has women representation in Sri Lankan leadership, Sri Lankan politics, improved as much as it should have during the past few decades?
That brings me back to how you opened this show with Mrs. Sirimava Bandaranayake being appointed as Prime Minister in 1964. Right. We have come about 50 years since then. We've had a female president as well, but female representation has stayed somewhat stagnant. And the highest number of women we have ever had in parliament is 13. That was in between 2015 and 2020.
Right.
Right.
To the previous parliament.
And the highest percentage of women we have had is far back as 1978. Right. That was before elections were held under this the current
Right.
Republican constitution. Right. So while we can boast of having appointed the first female head of state and having had a female president, I feel like we haven't done much work beyond that. We haven't done much work to address structural issues. The deep-seated structural issues need to be addressed. And if not, I do not see this percentage changing even in the future, given the trends of politics right now.
So, Chamathka, to our viewers out there, a young girl who would like to enter Sri Lankan politics, who would like to represent the female population here in Sri Lanka, what would you have to say?
Okay, see, the thing is, I think there's a lot stacked up against you. I think it's important that you set goals for yourself and achieve those goals. But I also have something to say to like the general population of this country. I think political literacy and knowing what's going on around you and your representatives, knowing your local representatives, knowing your council representatives, knowing your provincial representatives, knowing your parliamentary representatives is important. Go and see what sort of work they do and how they are amplifying your voices. Go to your local municipal council and see what work they do. I think the general citizenry of this country should be more political, be more politically involved. And if we don't tell them what we want, I don't think the political culture in this country will change. So a lot of it is up to the citizens.
Thank you very much, Chamathka, for joining us on our show. And that's a wrap of the Role of Law for today. Of course, we will see you again, same time, same place tomorrow. Thank you very much to all our viewers also for tuning in. Until then, take care and God bless.